Brake pad maintenance, definitely, especially if you're using brakes a lot, this needs to be done pretty regular. You know, of course, ideally you don't want this brake pad where it's completely worn out. This one here, you can see the shine on that pad. You're gonna have to switch her over. Hello, focus. So you see that shininess to the pad? You want to get that buffed off of it. This pad's completely like worn out, but you see how much that pad's tapered? You want to try to get that squared up as well. So good maintenance tips, take these things out. I'd say if you glow rotors, these things need to come out every night. If you don't glow rotors, probably every 2 weeks, I would pull these things out. Broom finished concrete works the best, and sand these things on that concrete. Just get those pores opened up. And if you have one that's tapered like that, look at the taper, and instead of putting like pressure in the middle of the pad, put pressure towards more of one end of the pad and try to wear that taper off of it, get it squared up. So if this pad's tapered, when I get on the brakes, it has to square up before it can clamp. Same difference when you let off the brakes. It basically has to unsquare and then release. So you want to have this as square as possible in the car.
Is that likely, the taper likely due to the angle on the caliper bracket?
So the taper, he's asking about what causes the taper basically. The taper comes from a couple things. One, if you have really bad caliper brackets where you're letting that caliper twist in there, for one. For two, the biggest problem with the GM caliper like that is the length of that brake pad. This brake pad length is the same length as what we use on a pavement car. It's really long. So when the rotor spins in this direction, as soon as it comes in contact with the brake pad, it basically vaporizes material and starts building gas. And it builds gas up between this pad and the rotor to the point where at this end, it physically lifts that pad off the rotor. So that's why you always have that taper, because of that gassing. In most of these classes, the rules won't let you run a slotted rotor. A slotted rotor will take that gassing and wipes the pad clean and gets rid of that gas. So if you can run a slotted rotor, I think some of you USRA guys can. Can't? So I thought you could. Yeah, I think you can, but I don't know. If you can, run a slotted rotor. A slotted rotor will wipe that gassing out, and it will help this taper tremendously. Also, you know, just make sure, like, some of these pads have different like noise canceling backing plates and stuff on them. Make sure you don't get any situations where it hits like this tab right here. Sometimes this one will actually come in contact with the caliper piston and can tilt this pad and bind it up as well. So be careful of this little tab on there.
Can you slot them pads a little bit?
Yep, that's why this one is done that way. And it definitely helps get that gas out right here. But you have to be careful because you can actually start bending the pad. It takes some of the rigidity out of it, but definitely you can slot them like that. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Yep. Be careful with your rules. I know some of your rules kind of get picky about this slotting, or like the PFCs have the ends of them ground at a taper. The stock ones do. Just make sure you're well within your rules. Don't go in here and put a whole bunch of slots in there because they will throw you out over that. On brake calipers, do they want the rubber bushings in or out? Which we talked about that. I prefer to take them or leave them in. And it's just to keep the piston from rounding around, knocking it back. But it shouldn't cause any binding.
How far would you let that get worn down before you might change it?
So you ask about how far to let this wear down before you change it. That's about as far down as I want to see that, about 1/8 of an inch. The biggest thing with the wear is chase it with pad spacers as it wears. So the pad spacers that actually are the same size as the backing plate, if you need an 1/8 inch one, put an 1/8 inch one. If you need a quarter, put a quarter in it, but chase it, keep that piston pushed back in as far as you can.
Yeah,
It gives you a lot better feel, everything.
We have 1/8 inch and 1/4 inch ones that we do that.
Yeah.
Especially on the front rotors that you can't get a spacer in. Once it gets worn down, then you can throw the 1/8 in.
Right. And I like the pad spacers that's the same shape as the pad as opposed to the pucks. Reason being is it gives basically more rigidity to this. So if you get that puck you see how this one's where it's worn here. So I've got no support pushing way out here on the ends. So you can definitely get a lot of flex in that. So the actual spacer itself can help make that a little bit more rigid. But you have to make sure you grind that off. Rotors, we've got the exploding rotor Tony up here. Anybody here have problems cracking the ears on the rotors? A few of you, okay. So here's a simple fix. So this one here has definitely had some heat in it where it's cracked off. So in your rear hubs, those things are threaded. Take a drill bit and drill the threads out of it. And then take a shouldered bolt that's the right length, put in there and put a crush lock style lock nut on it. And tighten it down to where it's tight and then back it off like a 1/16 of a turn, just where you can spin the boat but not move it. And what that'll do is it'll unconstrain the inside part of the rotor. So that rotor expands with heat and contracts. If I'm solid against the hub on the inside and the outside's trying to expand, it has no choice but to break those ears off. And most people use a 1/2 inch impact to put them on there, and about 5 Ugga Duggas, and it's nice and tight. So take those bolts, make them where you can spin them. A lot of the companies, I know like us, we're actually slotting those holes now to where you have more room to let that grow. So basically you're making a floating rotor out of it. But that will usually help that problem. On a rotor, this one here is not horrible, but still. You see how shiny this rotor is? So as you get these rotors hot and cold, hot and cold, hot and cold, they get harder and harder and harder and harder and harder, especially if you're using like a ceramic style brake pad or a brake pad that doesn't remove material from the rotor. So what you'll feel as a driver, you'll feel like you've got a rock hard pedal and the car just won't stop. What happens is the brake pad is not hard enough to grip the rotor now. The rotor has gotten so hard that it won't grab a hold of it, and you'll never stop it. So at that point, even if this rotor is not worn out, if it gets that shine on it like that, you need to replace it, because you'll never get that hardness out of that rotor to where that brake pad will grip it again.
Ben, I've seen guys that have taken like their little Makita grinder to the rotor.
Yep.
To basically get rid of that glaze. Do you recommend that?
Yeah, if you get in a bind somewhere, or if that rotor's got some deposit like that one does, that's not a bad thing to do, just to give some edges, basically, is what you're trying to do. You're scratching that surface to give an edge to grab a hold of again. That one, as hot as that one's been, you're not going to help it at all. That one needs to be replaced. But if you do that periodically and keep that off of it, it'll work a lot better.
Is that what Tony's rotors would look like?
Yes. They probably would be in 3 pieces, though. And your rotor needs to match really your brake temperature and your brake input as far as the weight of the rotor. So, in Tony's case, he might need a rotor that weighs 35 pounds to get enough cooling capacity to keep the brakes cool. Yeah. On other people that just stab the brake, if you just go down the corner and you just touch the brake like that, you can have the light of rotors you want. You're not using the brakes that much. You're not generating any heat. All you got to have is that quick burst of brakes, and then you're done. So you can balance that weight versus your driving style to get the best performance out of it.